السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين، صلى الله وسلم عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله وسلم عليك يا أبا عبد الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولقد كانوا عاهدوا الله من قبل لا يولون الأدبار وكان عهد الله مسؤولا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Chapter number 33, Surah Al-Ahzab, describes a significant event. And in a nutshell, it could be said that in the year 5 after Hijrah, corresponding with the year 627 in the Common Era, the Muslim community in Medina was surrounded by a coalition, thus the word Ahzab. And the battle that was fought was known as Ma'rakatul Ahzab, the battle of the coalition, but it was also known as Ma'rakatul Khandaq, the battle of the trench, because in preparation, it was the suggestion of one of the companions of Rasulullah, Salman al-Muhammadi, to build a trench in order to defend the community. And during that time, building a trench for defense purposes was not a familiar tactic amongst the Arabs, but it was amongst the Persians. So it was his suggestion. And the coalition, the Ahzab, were comprised of, number one, the Quraysh from Mecca. Number two, there were a number of pagan tribes from different parts of the Arabian Peninsula. And number three, some of the Jewish tribes which lived in the outskirts of the city of Medina. And of course, on the Muslim side, you had the Muslim community of Medina and their loyal allies. And the idea was that when the Prophet arrived to Medina, there should not be any treachery, that everyone in the community would support one another, that if there was a common enemy, all would contribute to defend from the attacks of the common enemy. So this was a ahd, this was a pact, it was a vow that took place. So, long story short, some people chose to break the vow. Amongst them were the hypocrites, and the hypocrites are mentioned in the Quran. In fact, there's an entire chapter in the Quran, Surah Al-Munafiqun, which is the chapter that comes immediately after Surah Al-Jumu'ah, which describes the state of some of the hypocrites. And the Quran says to them the following, in describing them, وَلَقَدْ كَانُوا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ مِنْ قَبْلُ لَا يُوَلُّونَ الْأَدْبَارِ, that they had given a commitment, they had given a vow that they should not turn away. And Allah says, وَكَانَ عَهْدُ اللَّهِ مَسْئُولًا, that the commitments and the vows you make towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will be accounted for and you will be asked about one day. Every single vow that you make, every commitment that you make, every undertaking that you do, that you commit yourself to. So, one of the repetitive elements in this chapter is the idea of commitment. For instance, in verse number 7, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ أَخَذْنَا مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ مِيثَاقَكُمْ وَمِنْكَ وَمِنْ نُوحٍ وَإِبْرَاهِيمَ وَمُوسَى وَعِيسَى بْنِ مَرْيَمْ وَأَخَذْنَا مِنْهُمْ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا, that we took a mithaq, we took a covenant from the prophets, and from specifically the 5 major prophets, which was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet Nuh, the Prophet Ibrahim, the Prophet Musa, and the Prophet Isa alayhi salam. Those were the five. That we took from them mithaqan ghalidha. We took from them a serious covenant. And according to the exegetes of the Quran, they say that the covenant was, number one, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not ascribe any partners to Him. Number two, to teach others to worship Allah and not ascribe any partners. And number three, to confirm the messages of the other prophets and the other messengers. So the repetitive theme in this chapter is the idea of commitment and following through with your word, that when you give your word to someone, you don't break that. And why this is important is because in today's day and age, one of the areas that people truly suffer is, number one, creating a commitment, initiating a commitment, and number two is following through with commitments. And you see this affect people in every area of their life. When it comes to relationships, the idea of commitment for many people is shaky. What does it mean when I enter into a marriage relationship with someone? I was listening one time, it was very interesting. A lawyer was talking about this. A secular divorce lawyer was saying this. That marriage is the most important contract, the most important legal contract that you will ever establish in your life. But most people, they take it the least seriously out of any of the contracts. They do more due diligence when it comes to getting a job, when it comes to buying a home, when it comes to leasing a vehicle, than they do when it comes to getting married. So it begins to rear its ugly head in different areas. So when it comes to relationships, when it comes to finances, sometimes we make a financial commitment that this year I'm going to save 10% of every paycheck that I receive. And then 2 months later, what happens? Someone that you're following buys something cool, and you want that very same thing, so you break your commitment to yourself. Or when it comes to health commitments, this is why, fitness centers and gyms, how they make the most amount of their money is off the people that don't show up, not the people that show up and use the facilities. It's the expensive memberships that they sell to people a year in advance, 2 years in advance, 5 years in advance, or the training sessions, knowing that most people aren't going to show up. Why? Because my back is too sore after the second or third session. So commitments, creating commitments and following through with commitments is one of the challenges of modern day society. So I want to talk about this from three different areas. And the first area is, what does it mean to commit to something? And how do you create a commitment? So what a commitment is it's when you stay true to your values. It's when you say something, when you proclaim something, when you write something, and you stay true and you follow through with that. And it's a very, very simple thing, but common sense is not common practice. So let's go back in time when commitments were established verbally. Now these days, when you create a commitment, a contract, you write something down, maybe you write it down on a piece of paper, or you type it up and you print it. Before the days of writing and before the days of printing, what you said was very, very important. Your word was your bond. Your word was your worth. If you said something, you had to mean it. If you said something, you had to follow through. So much so that when you study Islamic contracts, before there was a time of receipts, the way that a contract, for instance, the way that a transaction would be fulfilled, if someone was buying and someone was selling, the person that was buying would say ishtaraytu, and the person that was selling would say bi'tu. Literally, I sell. The seller would say, I sell you this, and the buyer would say, I am buying this. It was a verbal contract. That evolved if you look at it from an Islamic point of view, that evolved into something like a handshake or a clap. I'll give you an example. Now, because it became laborsome for people to say bi'tu, I mean, imagine every single time you purchase an item, you have to tell the vendor ishtaraytu, and they have to say bi'tu. How laborsome that would be. It's only 2 words, but I mean, it's pretty laborsome. That was replaced with the act of a clap. And this is why today in the Arabic language, one way to describe a financial transaction is with the word safqa. And the literal meaning of the word safqa in Arabic is a clap. I'll give you an example. This is a little bit of a side note, but there's a benefit to it. One day, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam turned to his companions. One companion in particular, by the name of Urwa al-Bariqi, he gave him a gold dinar. He told him to go to the marketplace and to purchase a sheep and come back with it. So he went to the marketplace. He purchased 2 sheep. He found 2 for the price of 1. Then he took one of them and he sold it for a dinar. He came back to the Prophet with the dinar and with the sheep. So the Prophet said, he turned to him and he said, Barakallahu fi safqati yaminik. He said, may God bless, if you translate it literally, the clap of your right hand. Because the clap refers to the transaction. So instead of saying ba'tu and ishtaraytu, they would clap, meaning that I have purchased this from you and you have given this to me. And we're both happy. Yameen refers to the right hand, so the hand that you get things done with. You know, you write. I mean, I know that there are people out there who are left-handed, and they actually say that geniuses are left-handed. But for all of us normal people, we conduct our affairs with our right hand. The way that you eat, when you shake hands, you don't extend your left hand. You extend your right hand. So you get things done with your right hand. So first, it was bi'tu wa ishtaraytu, and then it turned into a physical gesture, which was a clap, and now it's something completely different. It's writing through a receipt, and sometimes you don't even receive the receipt. These days, they offer to email you the receipt to make things much easier. But before, back then, your word was your bond. What you said, you had to follow through with. And these days, the problem is because we've become so far distant from that concept that people really don't watch their words. There's a book written by an author, Don Miguel Ruiz, The 4 Agreements. Maybe some of you are familiar with this book. And he talks about 4 principles to live by in order to achieve personal freedom. One of those agreements, one of those principles, he says, be impeccable with your word. Be impeccable with your word. Meaning that choose your words very carefully. Some people these days, it's just whatever comes out of their mouth. And most of the times we're repeating the garbage that comes in. You know, there's a concept, I think I'm not very familiar with computer science, but I've heard computer scientists, they talk, garbage in, garbage out. So if you put garbage into the system, what's going to come out? Garbage is going to come out. Well, the brain is also a computer, it's also a system. Garbage in, garbage out. If it comes through here, it's going to come out of here. So be impeccable with your word. Choose your words very carefully. And the Quran tells us, it says, وَقُلْ لِعِبَادِي يَقُولُ الَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Say to my servants, to instruct them to say and to speak only that which is best. If it's not the best thing that you can say, then don't say it. Be silent. Choose to be silent instead. So that's one area, the area of commitment through your word. So when you give your word, and that's exactly what the Quran is talking about with the hypocrites, that they gave their word that they weren't going to surrender. They weren't going to turn away. They weren't going to run. But when it came time to walk the walk, they ran away. The Quran says, وَلَقَدْ كَانُوا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ مِنْ قَبْلِ لَا يُوَلُّونَ الْأَدْبَارِ وَكَانَ عَهْدُ اللَّهِ مَسْئُولًا. And then the next verse, قُلْ لَنْ يَنْفَعَكُمُ الْفِرَارُ. It says that whatever you do, whether you choose to run away or whether you choose to stay, death is certain. So if you're going to escape it now, there's going to be a day that it's going to come to you. Meaning that everything that you commit to, وَكَانَ عَهْدُ اللَّهِ مَسْئُولًا, everything that you commit to in this world, in the next world, it's going to come back to you. At the end of your life, it's going to come back to you. So remember the commitments. Number 2, is the idea of procrastination and indecision. A lot of the times, we tend to procrastinate. We tend to delay. So when the Quran describes the hypocrites, what it is saying is that through procrastination and through trying to get away from their current responsibility, the only thing that they're doing is that they're delaying the consequence. They're not eliminating the consequence. And a lot of the times we fall prey to procrastination and indecision. Now, when it comes to procrastination, there are 4 reasons that I want to share with you. Number 1 is we tend to believe that procrastination, when you see someone procrastinate, we tend to think it's because of laziness. So if you see your kids, they're procrastinating, they're not keeping up with their homework assignments, we tend to think that it is because of laziness or it's because of the fact that they're not organized. But there are decades and decades of research that are dedicated to figuring out why people procrastinate. Why is it that people procrastinate? And what some of this research has revealed is that it has nothing to do with organization, and it has nothing to do with laziness. It's really tied to a fear. Among the things that it's tied to is a fear that you're not going to produce something worthy. That if I do it right now, I have a week to perform this project. If I get it done right now, it's not going to be at the quality that I want it to be. It's not going to be how I envision it. It's not going to be perfect. But the reality, if you think about it, nothing that you want tends to happen in the way that you want it. Nothing ends up being perfect because you are not perfect. Everything that you produce as a human being tends to have some sort of flaw in it. I'll give you an example. For those of you who are married or if you've been married for a while, go back to the time when some of you can't remember this far back, but try to remember a time when you were not married. Or maybe you were engaged and you were anticipating marriage and living with your life partner. There was a way that you fantasized about the relationship, that you were going to marry the perfect person, and everything was going to be perfect, and you were going to be so nice to one another, you were going to be so polite to one another, that she was going to take care of the home, it was going to be spick and span clean, you were going to go out and hustle and make money, and you're going to have beautiful children, and you know what color eyes your children have, and you've already picked out the names from 10 years before. And then what happens? Well, marriage happens. It's enough to say that. But you make it work. Regardless, you make it work. It's not perfect, but it's never meant to be perfect. So procrastination and indecision, what psychologists have found, is due to the fact that we expect everything that we do to be perfect, when in reality, nothing that you do is going to be perfect, ever. Because you're not a perfect person. And perfection is not required. Perfection should never be the goal. Rather, instead of perfection, we should strive for excellence. And excellence is doing the best that you can in any situation with the resources that you have. There's a difference between excellence and perfect. Number 2, the second reason behind procrastination and indecision is the fact that most human beings tend to be easily affected by the opinions of others. Everybody has an opinion about everything. And so when we go about our lives in making a decision, whether it's a decision that has to do with our relationships or with our health or with our finances, normally, if you think about it, who is your circle of advisors? Who's your advisory board? It tends to be the people or the person or the people that are emotionally invested in you. They have an emotionally invested interest, such as your parents, your siblings. Or it tends to be the people that you happen to spend time with on a daily basis. Your coworker, the person that's in the next cubicle. So how does that decision-making process, how does it start? Well, you think of, for instance, going on a diet. And there's so many different variations out there today. And there's so much information out there, and some of it is conflicting. And what's interesting is that some of them are conflicting, but they work. So when it comes to a diet and how much you should eat and the times that you should eat, there are some, if you're aware, that have the opinion that you should eat once every 2 hours. And they wake up in the middle of the night to eat because they want to eat once exactly every 2 hours. And then there's people of the opinion that say, no, you need to do intermittent fasting and you have to eat 1 time a day. And you need to fast for the rest of the day. They're two completely contradictory opinions. So depending on who you're going to ask, you're going to get a multitude of opinions. Now, this doesn't mean that don't consult anyone before you make a decision. You need to understand how to consult the proper people. I'll give you an example of that. And it's interesting because some of the most successful people are people who make decisions quickly but then are slow to change them. I'll give you an example, a contemporary example. Some of you are probably, of course you're familiar with the character of Henry Ford, the founder of the Ford Motor Company. Now, if you read his biography and you read his history, they'll tell you that he was one of the most stubborn, obstinate human beings. And if he had an idea for, the model of a vehicle or the model of a car or say the engine, how the engine should be or how the braking mechanism, he was going to implement it even if he had everybody standing against him, even his own children. If they would stand against him, he would be obstinate and he would follow through because he was a man of vision. There's a quote that's attributed to him. They said that if Henry Ford was so interested in the opinions of others, if he would have asked people what they wanted, they would have told him, we want faster horses. But he didn't listen to them. He created a vehicle. And when he created the vehicle, the car, with the combustion engine, he revolutionized transportation. And even though it wasn't nice at first because you had smog and you had all that stuff and it was scaring the horses, but who won the battle at the end of the day? The obstinate man. Now, I'm not saying be stubborn and obstinate and don't listen to people and don't consult, but, and some people, they say that quote is not attributed to Henry Ford at all. But even if it's not, it sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So it teaches us that you need to be able to make decisions. And you need to be able to commit to your decisions. If you've made a decision for a certain diet, for instance, and I always talk about, diets and health because it's the most relatable issue when it comes to, commitment and following through and laziness and whatnot. It's the most relatable because everybody experiences it almost all the time. If you make a decision, just follow through. Follow through with that. So knowing how to take the opinions of people who are actually experts in the field that you are trying to grow. And this is one of the biggest challenges even for young Muslims. Because the idea is that I need to honor my parents and I need to honor my family. And I agree with that, you do. But sometimes when you take advice from someone who doesn't have fruit on the tree in the area that you're trying to grow, you're not only not honoring them, you're dishonoring them. Because you are putting upon them the burden of giving you advice in an area that they are not knowledgeable. And that's a very uncomfortable spot to be in. When someone asks you, it's very uncomfortable, if you've noticed, for someone to say, I don't know the answer to this. But sometimes saying, I don't know is the right answer. In fact, there are a number of hadith that tell us that if you don't know the answer to something, be okay with saying, I don't know. And people who ask me questions and I don't know the answer, I tell them, I don't know. I can get the information for you, but I don't know at this current time. Maybe I've forgotten. So this is number 2, knowing how to stand strong in your own opinion. What tends to happen with people when they don't know how to stand strong in their opinion is that they're affected by everything that everyone says. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he categorizes people into 3 categories. He says people are either, the first category, alimun rabbani, which is an enlightened, knowledgeable individual, a person of conviction, a person who is an expert in an area. The second is muta'allimun ala sabil al-najat. So someone who is going through the process of enlightenment, a student, a knowledge seeker. And the third is everybody else. Who are they? Hamajun wa ru'a. In very nice language, savages. And he describes them. He says, these are the type of people that they fall, when the wind moves right, they move right. When the wind moves left, they move left. Because they never stand for anything. So knowing how to stand for something, knowing how to stand on the proper principles. Number 3, and what contributes to our indecision and our procrastination, is the world that we live in, that we have an abundance of options. Think about it. When you walk into the grocery store, or when you walk into the sandwich shop or the ice cream shop, you have an abundance of options. And so sometimes you walk into somewhere and there's so many options that you end up scratching your head and you leave. Because you don't know what you want. There's a psychology behind that. If there are any movie fans here, if you've seen The Matrix, what happens when Neo meets the architect of the Matrix? The architect tells him, he says, we've designed this matrix, and the matrix is this digital world, you can't really describe it through anything but the matrix. But it's this simulated world that human beings get stuck in the future. And the architect says that through the illusion of choice, we've given you so many choices, through the illusion of choice is the way that we're able to subdue human beings. That's how we're able to keep their minds stuck in the matrix. And the whole thesis of the Matrix is, freeing your mind, and it created a cult sensation if you watch the movies. Some of the most successful companies, when you walk in, I don't know if you have here in Ohio, do you have Pinkberry? So if you travel to other parts of the country, it's a chain of frozen yogurt. And you walk in and they have 3 or 4 options, that's it. They don't have any more than that. So when you walk in, you know exactly what you want. So I'll give you an example when it comes to relationships and why people don't find relationship satisfaction. There was a book that I was reading recently, and it was actually written by a Muslim comedian. And it was about romance and relationships in our modern world. And there was a lot of hard evidence in it, which was very interesting. And he said the following. He said that in 1932, 87 years ago, 1932, a sociologist from the University of Pennsylvania conducted a study where he looked at 5,000 marriage licenses that were done recently in the city of Philadelphia. And what he found was that a third of the people that got married, before they got married, they lived within 5 blocks of one another. 5 blocks, not 5 miles, 5 blocks. About 1,500 people surveyed out of 5,000 people. This is in the year 1932. Now you may be thinking, okay, well, Philadelphia is a big city. There are big, tall buildings. Obviously, people are going to live next to one another. He continued his research. He went to smaller towns where there were 3,000 and 4,000 and 5,000 people, and he found similar trends. Today, we live in a world where there's unlimited options. There was a young man who, a number of years ago, a very good young man who was searching for a wife. And it took him about 3-4 years to find the partner that he was looking for. Very good young man with good intentions, but every time I spoke to this young man, he was speaking to someone on the other side of the world. And Los Angeles the greater LA County has 18.4 million people. But he would speak to people from Malaysia and Australia and different states as if there was a scarcity and no one to talk to within your own community. And eventually, alhamdulillah, he got married. But the idea is that there's so much choice sometimes in our life that it paralyzes us from making decision. So this is the third. The fourth is that we also have instant gratification. We live in a world of on-demand. Everything is on demand. Amazon not only delivers the next day or 2-day shipping, there's same-day shipping, for those of you who don't know. You can order something and have it at your doorstep within 3 hours or 4 hours. So because we live in a world of on-demand, everything that you want happens right away, people begin to treat their options when it comes to relationships and health and finance as on demand. If I don't like it, I can cancel it and I can walk to the next plan. If I don't like this relationship, I can cancel it and I can walk to the next relationship. Psychologically, this tends to affect us. So this is the second area. And the third, and I'll end shortly, is when it comes to real life commitment challenges. How do you help people navigate through real life commitment challenges? So now we have these issues. I mean, you can't go and live off of the grid in the Amazon. Well, definitely right now you can't live in the Amazon. But you can't go live off the grid and expect not to be affected psychologically by anything that exists in this world. I'll give you an example when it comes to commitment through relationships, because, health and finance, it's important, but the most important thing in our life, the most important area and aspect that needs resolution are relationships, because relationships affects everything else. I'll give you an example. There was a book that was written by a Christian pastor, and he spoke about what happens when people come to him with marital conflict. And he says that sometimes I have people come to me with marital conflict, and they'll say that I would rather, and of course he was speaking against divorce. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Someone else has decided to take over. But he was speaking about relationship issues, and he says that sometimes people come to me and they say that, you know what, instead of continuously fighting with my husband or fighting with my wife, I'm going to choose to divorce. And he says, I'm going to challenge that idea. He says, when parents quarrel with one another, and this may rattle your cage the wrong way, but please just listen to it. He says that when parents quarrel with one another, when they disagree with one another, and then that's followed by a period of cooling down and then reconciliation, that teaches your children a valuable lesson. It teaches your children that, listen, in life, not everything is going to go the way that you want it to go. But when things don't go the way that you want it to go, you don't just pick up your marbles and leave. You learn to confront your challenges through communication. Now, sometimes there are very, very serious issues, such as physical abuse, psychological abuse, serious infidelity problems. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about the regular quarrelsome. And then people begin to come up with, once they quarrel, they start to come up with the excuse that we're not in love with one another anymore. 3 weeks ago you were in love. Now you're not in love anymore because of a quarrel. He says even if there are children, it's more detrimental to divorce. Even if you're arguing with one another, but you come together in reconciliation, you teach your children a very valuable lesson on commitment. Because it's from those days that they begin to recognize what it means to commit when the father loves the mother unconditionally, when the mother loves the father unconditionally. When certain arguments are not going to split them apart, they begin to learn about commitment. And there are a number of points that inshallah I will mention in the following days. Now I want to turn your hearts to the story of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And since we're on the topic of commitment and decision, the man that we honor tonight, his remembrance, is Al-Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi, a man who made the right decision. A man who, when he made his commitment, no matter what faced him, he didn't turn around. A man who was a man of status. He was a man of influence. He was a man that could have had whatever he wanted from this dunya, but he chose the akhirah over the temporary dunya. And the narration says that during one of the stops that Imam Hussein took, because I mentioned that from Mecca to Karbala there were about 14 stops. In one of those stops, in a place called Dhu Hasb, Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his caravan, exceeding just over 100 people, met with a group led by Al-Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi. Led by Al-Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi leading 1,000 people. And of course, because geographically they had strayed away, look at the heart of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Because they had strayed away from the path, because they had strayed away from the water, by the time they reached Imam Hussein alayhi salam, they were thirsty. All of them were thirsty. Some narrations tell us that Imam Hussein not only gave water to them, knowing that they were the enemy, knowing their intentions at the time, not only did he give water to them, he even gave water to their horses, the animals. And narration says that Al-Hurr saw the Imam, he came in contact with him, and Al-Hurr was from a very noble family. They were a family that were known for their nobility, their lineage. So he was a man of principle, he was a man of honor. He was not just any person that was Joe Schmo off of the street. He was a man of principle and honor, and he knew who Imam Hussein alayhi salam was. And he wanted to honor that relationship. And so he said to him, he said, Yabna Rasulullah, and narrations tell us that the Imam led the Dhuhr prayer, the noon prayer, and the soldiers of Al-Hurr stood behind the Imam. And the Imam spoke and delivered a sermon after the prayer. And he told them that you are here to stop us from our path, but some of you were the same people that wrote me letters inviting me to come to Kufa. Why are you here now stopping in my path? At the end of the day, they reached the decision that they would not allow Imam Hussein alayhi salam to go back, because one of his requests was, at least let me go back the other way that I came from. They said, we have decisions that we cannot let you go back. I have decisions that I have orders that I need to bring you into Kufa arrested. But Imam Hussein alayhi salam resisted. So at that point, Al-Hurr said to him, he said, خُذْ طَرِيقًا نَصَفًا بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكَ. He said, then take another path. Don't go back and don't come to Kufa, because if you come to Kufa, I have to arrest you. And that's where Imam Hussein alayhi salam turned to his companions, and they took the path which eventually led them to Karbala. Yesterday, the second of Muharram was the day that they arrived in Karbala. And on the day of Ashura, the same man, Al-Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi, he found himself in a position where he had to make the most vital decision in his life. Because he began to see the children of the family of Imam Hussein alayhi salam crying out, Al-Atash, Al-Atash, we are thirsty, we are thirsty. That began to shake him at his deepest level of his conscience. And so he began to tremble. One of his companions, one of the soldiers, Al-Muhajir ibn Aus, he turned to him. He says, what's wrong with you, O Hurr? He says, you're trembling like someone who is extremely frightened. If someone was to ask me, who is the bravest man in Kufa, I would not hesitate to say you. But now you are trembling like the most frightened person I've ever seen. And it was not fear that had him tremble. He responds, he says, إِنِّي أَرَى نَفْسِي مُخَيَّرَةٌ بَيْنَ الْجَنَّةِ وَالنَّارِ. What is causing this tremble is that I see myself, nafsi, and I see heaven on one side and I see hell on the other side. And he says, by God, I will choose nothing over the heaven. Nothing. No matter what you offer me in this world. And so at that moment, brothers and sisters, he made the decision and the commitment to follow through with that decision. So he took some water and he began to draw nearer to the camp of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And he began to seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma ilayka unib. Oh Allah, I come back to you in repentance. For I have caused fear to be struck in the hearts of your awliya. I have caused fear and terror to be in the hearts of the sons of your Prophet. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the same man who prevented him from reaching Kufa, he finds place in his heart to forgive him. And so when it came time to the battle, narrations tell us that this is where Al-Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi displayed his bravery, his true courage, that he went out into the battlefield and he began to fight, defending the camp of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, defending the women folk of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Narrations tell us that he struck down by himself, up to 40 warriors. And at that time, because of the heat, because of the thirst, because of the weakness, the enemy came and surrounded him and they struck him down. And when they struck him down, he could not defend himself, so they surrounded him. They began to strike him from all directions. Finally, when he was in those final moments of his life, the companions of Imam Hussein, they brought his body back to the camp. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he tended to him personally. He began to remove the dirt from his face, from his beard. Narration say that he began to say to him, "Bakhin, bakhin laka ya Hurr, bravo O Hurr. Truly you are a free man as your name says. Truly you are a free man as your mother named you in this dunya, in this life and in the hereafter. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين